Moin, liebe Cap Insider, herzlich willkommen zu einem neuen Video hier bei uns auf capinsight.com und auf unseren Social Media Kanälen. Und es geht noch einmal um den Ukraine-Krieg, den Russland führt und welche Auswirkungen das auf den Finanzmarkt hat. Wir dürfen mit ganz vielen tollen Persönlichkeiten sprechen und ich freue mich jetzt. Great welcome to Silvia Dall Angelo, Senior Economist from Federated Hermes.
Thank you, Matthias.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Federated Hermes and your position there. You are the senior economist, so you are for providing macroeconomic analysis and something, yeah?
That's right. So I'm a senior economist at Federated Hermes. I provide the macroeconomic views for our investment teams. There's no official in-house view per se at Federated Hermes, and every investment team is free to make its own views of the role, let's say, in order to have more diversification and more alpha across teams. But of course, my role is really one of spurring debate and generating trading ideas and debates about the macroeconomic views and its impact and their impact on the market.
All right. So you have a Master of Science in Economic and Social Sciences. You the best in position for economics. And so before we start with an analysis of the markets, your daily job as an economist, how did the Ukrainian war affect you and Federated maybe from the beginning till now?
So we started to talk about the Ukrainian crisis or a possible Ukrainian crisis late last year when we started to have the reports about the buildup of Russian troops around the borders. And of course, at the very beginning, we didn't really think that it was really possible, but because we work with investment and with risk, we started quite early to focus on the issue and to consider the risk and the possible repercussions on investments.
Right. So Federated Hermes has 544 billion euro assets under management, and the invests are globally in all asset classes. So you're investing globally with a focus on Europe and US markets. How does the conflict affect? Let's talk about inflation, prices, central bank politics. That's one of the most topics in the last days. The US and the European markets. What do you think?
Well, first of all, this sort of geopolitical crises typically have an impact on financial markets and on the economy, and they have different channels to affect the economy. First of all, let's start from that. Of course, financial markets can be disrupted and there can be volatility. Also, we can have an impact on sentiment, business and consumer sentiment, and therefore potentially on business decisions and consumer decisions down the line. But what we're seeing here mainly is an impact on energy prices, given that Russia is one of the main producers of oil and gas in the world, accounting for about 10% of global oil production and like 17% of gas production as of 2021. The impact from this intensification of the crisis in Ukraine is likely to be like a big rise in energy prices, and then we have already seen oil prices breaking well above the $100 per barrel threshold. And as such, it's going to be a stagflationary shock. So having both an inflationary impact, but also a negative effect on global growth. I think at this stage it's quite hard to quantify the exact impacts, and also it depends on different regions. But just back of the envelope, oil prices are up like 25% since the beginning of February, and that should boost inflation rates by about 0.5 percentage points or 0.6 percentage points. And on top of that, we should also have higher inflation because of wheat prices, as both Russia and Ukraine are grain producers. And also we might see more general supply chain disruptions also fueling inflation. So if this environment of high commodity prices and supply chain disruptions is sustained, we might see like high cost-driven inflation and in turn also weaker demand and weaker growth.
And how do you assess the economic impact of the sanctions issued so far? So the European Union has many sanctions, and already Swiss is going with these sanctions. The neutral one, the last days, that was big news. Which scenarios do you expect for this?
Once again, there is a lot of uncertainty, of course. So far, sanctions have focused really on the financial sector in Russia, but they've tried to carve out the energy sector so that supplies of gas and oil should continue out of Russia. That said, I mean, this supply of oil gas has already been disrupted because in a way, all exports and trade with Russia is already disrupted. So it's unclear whether we see, like, actually, I would say that it's likely that we'll see high energy prices and possibly even higher if this crisis continues. In terms then of financial sanctions, I think they are particularly painful for Russia, but of course Russia could also retaliate, and the pain could be like very pronounced, especially for Europe. And we're already seeing like high energy prices in Europe, and with a potential, drag on growth and of course boost to inflation.
Yeah. So let's look at the differences between two markets and two economies. You are invested with Federated Hermes in Europe and in the US market. Do you see any differences between the impact for the European and the US economy? Which regions, and you told about it, branches are more affected? What do you mean?
As already discussed, I mean, there are differences in the impact from this war in Ukraine. Clearly, Europe is likely to be more affected than the US. Europe imports about 30% of its gas from Russia, so it's heavily dependent on Russian commodities, energy commodities. And therefore the drag on growth could be particularly pronounced. Like if oil prices remain at the current level of $110 per barrel, we might see a drag of about 0.6, 0.7 percentage point on GDP growth this year in Europe. And at the same time, inflation is also likely to be boosted, as I said. And again, if oil prices stabilizes at their current level, then we might see a boost to inflation of about 0.5 percentage points. And again, that's like a conservative estimate, given that we might also see an impact from higher food prices and in general supply chain disruptions. As for the US is clearly more insulated. The US is also more independent from an energy perspective. And so the impact on growth and inflation should be more limited for the US.
All right. So we talked about your globally invests in all asset classes. Let's talk about the investment strategy responding to the current developments. Are you changing something, or was there a change for Federated Hermes?
So as I said earlier, we started to focus on this situation quite early on. Our exposure to Russia was fairly contained to start with. And since the crisis has started to deteriorate, our investment teams have lightened their exposure to Russia further. So as it stands, we are quite protected, I would say, and insulated from what's happening in Russia.
All right. So thank you for the moment. Silvia Dall Angelo, Senior Economist from Federated Hermes. Thank you.